So, good evening, everyone. I'll be clearing some myths about the micropulse laser and the MIGS surgery today. So, I have no financial declarations. Now, the great debate before all of us is that what glaucoma surgery should we choose for which patient? And if you see the numerous glaucoma surgeries available to us, and the patient presenting to us Google's all these options. So currently glaucoma specialists like me can be abbreviated as CMPs, that is confused mass of protoplasm. There is no consensus on what surgery to choose for which patient. So you have a patient, supposing he has glaucoma. So in South America, he'll get a MR glaucoma valve. If he goes to USA, he might get an eye stent. If he goes to Europe, he might get a hydrous implant. If he comes to India, he might get trabeculectomy or a GAD procedure. So there is absolutely no consensus or guidelines on the adoption of MIGS technique. And that is why this is an area of great ethical concern and scientific debate. And people are just adopting these techniques without realizing the long term benefits or harms of these procedures. Now, a number of times I received a call from colleagues or previous students, and they ask one of these questions very frequently. The first one is they do a trap, should we use the collagen implants? Then many of us are calling me and asking, should we purchase the micropulse laser from Iridex or Quantal? The third is regarding MIGS. Should we start using MIGS for our patient? And then this opinion emerging from North America that should we completely discard traps and move on to MIGS because they are much safer. Now, the entire thing started off because of the complications of TRAP. So, trabeculectomy with mitomycin C, as you can see, can have a plethora of complications. So, there has been always a research into new techniques of glaucoma surgery, which are safer and also equivalent to trabeculectomy. And most of these complications are related to the use of mitomycin C. So the first thing I'll be talking about was the replacement of mitomycin C in trabeculectomy, and that was the Ologen implants. So should we replace mitomycin C by collagen implants in trabeculectomy? If you see the studies in literature, the randomized controlled trials comparing trabeculectomy mitomycin C versus trabeculectomy Ologen implant, it's very clear. You can see Ologen implant has very bad results as compared to trabeculectomy with mitomycin C. Very poor success rate as compared to trabeculectomy with mitomycin C across all populations. This was European, this is Singapore. You can see IOP reduction with Ologen is only 2 millimeters as compared to 8 with mitomycin C. And in the European trial, actually, they found that there was very high risk of fibrosis, and they took out the blebs and the implant which had failed, and they found that there was an invasion of fibroblast, and that led to a very poor outcome. As you can see, 40% success as compared to 93% with trab mitomycin C. And actually, they recommended that you should not use Ologen implants alone. If at all, you use them along with mitomycin C. So this was the trial at RP Center by brilliant resident thesis given to Vritika Sen, in which we found that trabeculectomy with mitomycin C compared to trabeculectomy mitomycin C coupled with Ologen, there is no benefit of adding the collagen implants to trabeculectomy, even with use of mitomycin C. So we totally stopped using these implants for trabeculectomy, and we are using only for repair of blebs. So these implants actually promote fibroblast ingrowth. So they have been used as patch grafts. So not for trabeculectomy, only if you are managing bad blebs and you need a patch. If you don't have sclera and you have a small defect, then they can be used as patch grafts. So should we use implants for trabeculectomy? The answer is no. They cannot replace mitomycin C. Now, something I want to highlight of what is happening in literature. So now I have given you the first clear-cut message that collagen implants are not useful for trabeculectomy. Mitomycin C is still the gold standard. Now you see this study from North America, which reports that success rate of collagen implants is significantly better than mitomycin C. So this is totally an opposite of what is our clinical experience and what the literature from Asia and Europe is leading us to. And very important thing to understand, whenever you read an article, you must see below the author financial disclosures. So you can see multiple author, consulting fees and travel support, consulting fee and travel support. So that is the second message I want to give, that whenever you are evaluating these minimally invasive glaucoma surgeries, which have expensive devices or implants, this was a study done by Dr. Bice from Canada. They reviewed the MIGS studies and especially the highest power randomized controlled trials on MIGS. And you can see very shocking results. 90% had industry funding. 60% of the authors are shareholders in the company. And among the author, 60% had industry employees as authors. So whenever you have this literature published in which there is a industry funding and industry shareholders participating, very rarely you will get an adverse outcome reported. So that is why it's very important before you start these new surgery. Of course, you read literature, but you must ask your colleagues, especially overseas, about their actual clinical experience, because the actual clinical experience in the OR is quite different from what is being reported in literature, as I have just shown you in the previous example. Now, coming to the micropulse laser, also classified as a subcyclo laser, available from these two companies, which is becoming very popular in India. It's being marketed as a replacement to trabeculectomy. The probe is a single-use disposable probe costing 20,000. So the patient can pay anything between 20 to 30, 35,000 for a micropulse therapy. So this is now being marketed as a non-invasive IOP lowering therapy with excellent safety and efficacy, which qualifies as primary therapy. And this is especially being pushed in the COVID epidemic as a replacement to trabeculectomy. So let us find out more about the micropulse. The basic concept is quite simple. It turns the continuous beam into a repetitive pulse. The basic aim is to reduce the laser energy delivered, so the duty cycle is 31.3%. This prevents the overheating and collateral damage to the surrounding tissues. How does it work? The primary mechanism is a subthreshold damage to the epithelium of the ciliary body that reduces aqueous humor formation. Other mechanisms which don't have enough scientific background are increased UV outflow because it causes inflammation eye, and a pilocarpine-like effect. And this effect, in fact, may be dangerous because you have even retinal detachments being reported after micropulse therapy. The procedure, why it is becoming popular, it looks very simple. So you have this probe, you just sweep it across adjacent to the limbus, and the cycle is 80 to 90 seconds, and now it has been reduced to 50 seconds per hemisphere. Now, as a surgical procedure, it looks very simple, but the catch is in the simplicity. So now you can see the procedure being done. So there are a number of variables which are not being catered to. So the company gives you a fixed energy level and a fixed duration. That is what you do. But what is more important is the sweep velocity. So supposing I am doing this procedure, I'm doing slowly, and somebody else is doing, he's doing very fast. So that totally changes the fluence, the energy delivered to the end tissue. Second, very important thing which is not at all catered is the location of the ciliary body. That can be very variable in young patient versus old patients post vitrectomy. This is not at all catered to. And another very important factor is the degree of pigmentation. So the degree of pigmentation varies, and higher the pigmentation, lesser the energy required, and that is not catered to with the micropulse therapy. So now let us see what are the long-term outcomes in multicentric studies of the micropulse therapy. So this was one of the large multicentric studies reporting the 1-year outcomes. You can see, and the success rate is IOP less than 21. You can see the success rate is only 36.5%. And even when you repeat the surgery, the success rate is only 58%. You can see the IOP falling from 21 to 18, and the number of medication reducing from 3.6 to 3.1. So even one medication has not been reduced, and the success rate, so 70% are failing. And furthermore, it's being marketed as a very safe procedure, but the most important complications are mydriasis. So there's a permanent increase in the size of the pupil, and this is very significant when you start doing procedures in eyes with good vision. And you can see 15% of the patient lost more than 3 lines of Snellen acuity. So it can lead to an irreversible loss in visual acuity, which is quite a significant complication. And these are persistent complications. Now let us see the most important trial from the inventor of the micropulse himself, Professor Paul Chew from Singapore. And this is the first study which has actually given the long-term 3-year outcomes of micropulse laser. And the success, again, IOP less than 21 millimeters of mercury. And you can see the graph. There is a precipitous fall in the success rate. So at 1 year, the success rate is 44%. And you see at 3 years, the success rate falls to 18.5%. And mind you, this is less than 21. The number of medication reduced from 3.3 to 2.6. So hardly even one medication has been reduced. The most important message is that the survival time of doing a single micropulse is 9 months. And the studies we have done at RP Center, most of the patients come back with a high IOP after 3 to 6 months. So that is the time in which the intraocular pressure will be reduced, and then you have to repeat. This trial again reported very significant complications, loss of visual acuity more than 2 lines in 14%. But what is very serious is the phthisis bulbi reported in 7 eyes. So micropulse is being advocated as a safe procedure, but as you can see here, it can lead to phthisis bulbi. So that is something which is a warning sign to all of us. So what the authors recommend is that the micropulse is only useful as a adjunctive procedure to other glaucoma surgeries, not as a standalone. It is only as an interim procedure for a temporary reduction in intraocular pressure. You will need to reoperate on these patients, and there is definitely a risk of prolonged hypotony, loss of visual acuity, and phthisis bulbi. Now, it's very important why I was telling you before you do any procedure laser on the ciliary body, you must do transillumination. Now you can see in this patient, we are doing a transillumination. So this is an endoilluminator, and you can see the location of the ciliary body is quite posterior as compared to this patient where it is just perilimbal. So if you do micropulse at similar locations, you are going to get a very different result in this patient versus this patient. So always when you're doing the micropulse or the continuous wave diode laser photocoagulation, you must do a transillumination. identify the edge of the ciliary body by this dark shadow, and then only place your probe. And that is something that is not being featured in the micropulse therapy because it's a standard fix for all patients. And now, because the results were quite poor, so the group from Singapore changed the strategy. So in patients who have failed micropulse therapy or who have refractory glaucoma, they changed the protocol to what is known as MP3 plus. So here you do the MP3 laser conventionally and then give 16 additional 2-second spots. And you can see after the MP3 additional laser, the success criteria here, the success criteria is very high, IOP less than 25, which is not appropriate. But still, with this criteria, success was only 25% at 1 year. And now it is being recommended that you use something known as cyclomix. That is superior quadrant, you do micropulse, and inferior hemisphere or inferior half, you do conventional DLCP to achieve appropriate result, because just doing micropulse is not going to give you a sufficient outcome. And I would encourage all of you to read this editorial from Harry Quigley on the need for rigorous evaluation of these micropulse procedures, and especially regarding its safety. So when you are sweeping the probe over the conjunctiva after giving a block, you can get a conjunctival hemorrhage. If you apply the laser over the area of the hemorrhage, you can get a thermocoagulation and a very dense scar formation. And then your future glaucoma surgery like trabeculectomy is going to be compromised. So if you have a hemorrhage in the conjunctiva during the procedure or during the block, never proceed with the micropulse laser. You are going to get a serious scarring. And another very important complication is creeping up. A lot of glaucoma patients have ocular surface disease. And now you have neurotrophic keratopathy being reported after micropulse laser, because when you are painting the entire perilimbal nerve plexus, that is damaging the corneal nerves. So you must check the corneal sensation. Patients who have poor corneal sensation or severe pre-existing ocular surface disease, micropulse may not be a good option. This patient requires tarsorrhaphy after micropulse. And finally, you have a combination of increased inflammation and hypotony after micropulse, and that can lead to precipitous suprachoroidal hemorrhage. So these are the devastating sight-threatening complications which you can get with the so-called safe micropulse laser. So I think micropulse laser is a short-term IOP lowering modality. You require repeat applications, which makes it very expensive surgery. You may use it to reduce need for medications once surgery has failed, especially elderly patient. However, it's not a long-term solution for IOP control. It never achieves desired target IOP. And as you can see, there is no standard treatment for all the patients. You are causing a significant breakdown of the blood aqueous barrier with inherent vision threatening complications and a permanent increase in the size of the pupil, which is very significant in countries like ours where there is a bright sunlight. So my take is that in case you have to do the diode laser cyclophotocoagulation, instead of the micropulse, you can do a inferior 180-degree conventional DLCP that leaves the superior conjunctiva intact for a future glaucoma surgery. You must trans-illuminate to identify the ciliary body. And you can read about this technique, which is known as a slow coagulation. So you use a very low energy. Normally we were using 2000 milliwatt. So here you start with 1250 milliwatt for 3 to 4 seconds. These are slow cook parameters that reduces the complications of continuous wave laser. And if you do only 180-degree, that significantly decreases the vision threatening side effects. So this is a good cheap alternative to very expensive 360-degree micropulse laser. Now coming to the minimally invasive glaucoma surgeries. So before you start these surgeries, you must learn the skill of intraoperative gonioscopy. So this is a Swan Jacob lens, and you can see a view of the angle. So you have to learn to tilt the microscope, tilt the patient's eye, and use the gonioscope to view the angle structure. So before learning anything about MIGS, you must learn how to do intraoperative gonioscopy. Now, if you want to do MIGS, so before you read literature or you have a peer review, so many of surgeons, they want to have a direct feel of how this surgery works. So I have written start MIGS with a bang. What does this bang stand for? So bang basically stands for bent ab interno needle goniectomy. So this is a new technique of MIGS in which you are just using a 26 gauge needle. You need to put in a Swan Jacob lens, identify the trabecular meshwork, put in viscoelastic, small bend in the 26 gauge needle, and then you insert the needle, make a opening in the trabecular meshwork, and then just cut out a part of the trabecular meshwork. So this is a minimally invasive glaucoma surgery which does not require any expensive instrumentation. You should do it in the nasal quadrant. I'll show you why that later. So you sit temporally, insert the needle into the trabecular meshwork, and then you cut open a part of the trabecular meshwork. Initially for this surgery, you can do 30 to 60 degree. You should not exceed that because then you can land up in more complications. Now you see this part of the trabecular meshwork has been removed, and you can reverse the needle and remove the other part. You can see this white zone appearing. So the trabecular meshwork is being cut. So this is the technique which you can start with MIGS, the bent ab interno needle goniectomy. And initial results show it has a very modest IOP lowering with 30 degrees of trabecular meshwork removal. Short-term IOP drop is 10 to 20%. So if you want to do MIGS, you can start with a simple procedure without any expensive need for instrumentation or devices. As far as the conventional MIGS goes, there are broadly two kinds of devices: the ab externo devices, such as the InFocus implant or the PreserveFlow implant. This is now taken over by Santen for subconjunctival filtration. And then you have the ab interno MIGS techniques that either enhance trabecular outflow or they enhance suprachoroidal flow. These have been withdrawn due to endothelial decompensation or loss. And then you have ab interno subconjunctival filtration. So the Zen implant and the PreserveFlow are full thickness implants that have been advocated as replacements for trabeculectomy. And the other are actually ab interno MIGS techniques that enhance trabecular outflow. So there are basically three types of procedures for the canal of Schlemm. Either you cut through the trabecular meshwork, or you dilate trabecular meshwork, or you stent the trabecular meshwork. As I showed you in the bang technique, that is a simple way of cutting because stenting is very expensive. These are on average 1,000 US dollars to the patient. Now you must understand it's not a problem of the glaucoma surgeon or the glaucoma device. Glaucoma surgery is an inherent paradox because it is not physiological. So whenever you remove a part of the trabecular meshwork or you make a hole in the sclera, the healing mechanism of the human body tries to close it. So once it closes the fistula or closes the implant, you will get scarring and failure. In trabeculectomy, we use mitomycin to inhibit the wound healing, but in ab interno, you cannot use any antifibrotic. And that is why over time, all these clefts or implants will finally fibrose and fail. That is due to the normal wound healing response. And second very important thing which is being missed with these implants is the target IOP. So when you set target IOP, any patient who has a arcuate scotoma in one hemisphere, that is a moderate glaucoma, target IOP is 15 or below. So this is the usual stage, moderate to advanced glaucoma, where we are looking in for glaucoma surgery. Early glaucoma, ocular hypertension, the target IOP is 18 or below, but normally we start off mostly operating when the patient reaches moderate primary open angle glaucoma. Now, coming to the easiest MIGS procedure, that is the eye stent, that is very popular now, and it is being done more by phaco surgeons rather than glaucoma surgeons. So, this is the easiest, most widely used MIGS procedure. And as you can see, the price tag of 1000 US dollar, this is one of the most valuable items on earth. And the initial eye stent was this design. So basically, you put it inside the trabecular meshwork to create a bypass from the anterior chamber into the canal of Schlemm. And if you see the IOP lowering outcomes, comparing cataract surgery alone versus cataract with the eye stent, you can see the IOP lowering with eye stent at 12 months, IOP less than 21 was 68% as compared to 50% with cataract surgery alone. So very little benefit in terms of IOP lowering. And again, I'm telling you, IOP is less than 21. So this is not a target for any type of glaucoma. This is just for ocular hypertension. It should be at least be less than 18. So then they moved on that one eye stent was not sufficient. So why not put two eye stents at the same time? So this is the new one, eye stent inject. You have preloaded two eye stents which are put in the nasal part of the trabecular meshwork. And this is a very large trial, the COMPARE study, which compared the Hydrus implant with the eye stents. And you can see the IOP lowering efficacy with two eye stents. If the target IOP is less than 18, only 9% of the patient could achieve a target IOP. So imagine you are paying 1000 US dollars and you are not able to achieve a IOP of less than 18. That is the minimal IOP for a patient of early glaucoma. And then there was this beautiful study from Andrew Marmot's group in Switzerland, where we again evaluated eye stent inject versus phacoemulsification. And you can see phaco with two eye stents, the IOP lowering was 8.7%. And in the control group, that is phaco alone, the IOP lowering was 15%. So imagine that IOP lowering is hardly there. And furthermore, in this study, a very nice thing they did was they evaluate the position of the eye stent on the anterior segment OCT. And you'll be surprised to see that on the ASOCT, 45% of the eye stents were buried within the trabecular meshwork. That means they are not conducting the aqueous to the Schlemm's canal. They are buried deep. So there was a problem in implantation. So although these techniques look very simple, there's a large learning curve. And so basically half of the implants have been wrongly placed. So imagine the financial loss to the patient and the loss in efficacy with the procedure. And so I was asked to comment on this in the IGR. And I personally feel that the eye stent is the least effective of the MIGS procedures. And we should be actually having an ethical discussion whether this should be approved for use in glaucoma patients or no, because hardly there is any IOP lowering and you are charging the patient such a premium fees. Now, is there any physiological reason of, although in principle it looks very nice that you are stenting through the Schlemm's canal, so why are we getting such a low IOP lowering? So that has been evaluated using aqueous angiography, studies done by Alex Huang. And you can see that if you study the aqueous angiography, the outflow channels are very limited. So like you can see in this particular patient, you have these two areas of large outflow. Now, if you place an eye stent in a region where there is no outflow channel, it is definitely going to fail because it's a very segmental, non-uniform outflow. And secondly, why I was telling you, you start your bang with in the nasal quadrant, because they found that the maximum outflow channels are concentrated inferonasally. So if you're going to get a good outcome, it is going to be in the inferonasal quadrant. So whatever MIGS you are starting off, the inferonasal quadrant is the best. So ideally, you should do aqueous angiography guided MIGS, but very laborious, very expensive procedure. It is not at all practical to do that. And this is only one time. So you cannot evaluate in the post-operative period because this is an invasive angiography, you have to inject dye in the anterior chamber. So now the next set of options is to, instead of putting a small stent, why not open a large part of the canal? That is being done with the Kahook dual blade or the trabectome, or the Japanese use a hook. And this technique I showed you, the 26 gauge needle. So opening 90-degree or 120-degree of the trabecular meshwork is the second option. And this is very been popular in the several years with the trabectome. But now see the success rates of trabectome when you open 120-degree of the trabecular meshwork with radio ablation. Again, IOP less than 21. The success rate of trabectome is only 22.4% as compared to 76% with trabectectomy. So again, very little IOP lowering, and again, very expensive procedure. And you can see this is the results of the Mayo Clinic series on the trabectome. IOP less than 18, only 22%. So actually, the authors recommended that the trabectome is appropriate for patients requiring a target IOP of 21 millimeters or above. And that I have shown you is not a target for glaucoma patients. And in addition, you are causing a hyphema to the patient. So now the KDB is available in India, the Kahook dual blade. And basically, you are incising a part of the trabecular meshwork. And again, you see the IOP lowering reported in the first study ranges from 13 to 24% at 6 months. So you get a mild lowering of intraocular pressure by excising the trabecular meshwork. So now the question comes that instead of just doing 60-degree or 90-degree, why not open the entire trabecular meshwork? So you rip the entire trabecular meshwork by doing a GAT procedure. So this is a gonioscopically assisted transluminal trabeculotomy, and the initial results by Dr. Devinder Grover. So definitely you are getting a 30% drop in IOP, but you have high incidence of hyphema, 30% failure rate, and you have a category of non-responders, and I'll come to this later. So definitely if you open up the entire trabecular meshwork, you can get a lowering of pressure that is in the high teens. So what now surgeons are recommending is that in this study, they selected patients who are more than 18 years of age. So if a glaucoma patient comes to you, you first do the GAT procedure. If it works well and good, if it doesn't work, then you do a trabeculectomy. And this I want to tell you is very dangerous, and why reason. And mind you, people are just rupturing the trabecular meshwork. This is not just a passive structure put in by nature. This is the actual pump system which pumps the aqueous into the outflow channel. It has inlet and outlet valves. And if you rupture this entire system, you will get reflux of blood into the anterior chamber. So you should be very careful before you just go in and remove the entire trabecular meshwork. And after the GAT procedure, you have to warn the patient to have a head elevation. Now it is recommended you leave some viscoelastic. You have to stop anticoagulants. And it is not good for young patients because you have to restrict their physical activity. They cannot do head down posture. So Valsalva is contraindicated. And why I say young patients? Because you have removed the entire trabecular meshwork. In the next 5-10 years, you might get new drugs that target the trabecular meshwork. So you are leaving this population out of this advance. You cannot do SLT. And this I already showed you, the reflux bleeding if the intraocular pressure falls below the epicelial venous pressure, especially if you do a later on trabeculectomy. And you have to understand that in all these MIGS procedures, you are going to get a rebound increase in IOP. So you have ruptured the trabecular meshwork. So instead of that, you are going to get a wound healing response. The entire area is going to fibrose. And that is going to lead to a rebound increase in intraocular pressure. And that is now being reported. So that is the called turn back elevation in intraocular pressure after the trabeculotomy procedure. So initially IOP was very low, but if you see the outcome after 2 years or more, the graph falls down. So you get very poor outcomes ranging to 30% success at the end of 2 years. And this will keep on worsening with time as the fibrosis keeps on happening. So One is the healing response that causes fibrosis and obstructs the outflow channel. And second thing is, with these tubercular procedures, you are not tackling the distal outflow obstruction that is beyond the canal of Schlemm. And this is turning out to be a very important factor in the total resistance to aqueous outflow. So once you have done a GAD procedure, why does it fail? The, the remaining TM leaflets, they just fuse together over time. And that again, IUP rises because you are liberating so much pigment with rupture of the tubercular meshwork. The pigment accumulates and clogs the outflow channel. And then you get a fibrous membrane covering the channel. And with these procedures, you are damaging the outflow channels and the valvular system in the tubercular meshwork. That is why inherently they are going to fail over time. And this was a gonioscopic evaluation after ab interno tuberculotomy in Japan, and where they found that these are patients of open angle glaucoma. And they found that 86% of these patients develop peripheral anterior synechia after the ab interno tuberculotomy procedures. That is a very serious complication because now you are converting a primary open angle glaucoma disease into an angle closure disease. So these patients need to be followed up with a close gonioscopy over time, and then only you come to know what is actually happening in the angle. The IOP is rising because of the development of peripheral anterior synechia formation. The next controversy is nobody knows how much of tubercular meshwork to open, and that is because in the studies on trabectome, they found there is no correlation between the size of the trabeculotomy opening. So you can see here, the trabeculotomy opening is only 50 degrees, and here it is 150 degrees. But if you compare the IOP lowering outcome, both are similar. So they found that there is no correlation. Larger size does not mean you are going to get a larger reduction in intraocular pressure. And this is a very important study done in enucleated human eyes, where they saw that how much of clock hour of trabecular meshwork removal, how much is the resistance eliminated. And what they found was if you remove 1 clock hour of the trabecular meshwork, 30 degree of resistance is eliminated. With 4 clock hours, 42%. And if you remove the entire 12 clock hours, 49%. That means even with 360-degree removal of trabecular meshwork, half the resistance has not been removed. And if you just remove 1 clock hour, the effect is equivalent to 60% of the effect of 12 clock hours. That is why I would recommend in MIGS, don't remove the entire tubercular meshwork. You should restrict to between 30 to 120 degrees, preferably only one quadrant, that is the nasal quadrant, because there is a physiological basis to a limited removal of the tubercular meshwork. And finally, everybody is saying that the quality of life is better after MIGS. That is why we are adopting MIGS over tuberculectomy. But the answer is no. When they evaluated the quality of life with the iStent trabectome versus tuberculectomy, there was no difference in quality of life. And actually, tuberculectomy is better because if you see the need for medications, that is very less in tuberculectomy. Whereas in these MIGS procedures, patients require high level of post-operative topical medications. So they have to increase the cost post-operatively, plus all the side effects of topical medication are still existing. Finally, coming to the full thickness procedure. So the Zen implant, which is gelatin implant 6 millimeter, was advocated as a replacement to trabeculectomy. It became very popular in the Europe, especially UK. So this implant is put ab interno under the conjunctiva, and while putting the implant, you can get a subconjunctival hemorrhage. So this is very bad because this is going to fibrose and lead to bleb failure. And secondly, you are injecting this implant in a localized area that leads to fibrosis. So the needling rates are very high, 43% needling rate after Zen implant. That indicates that the implant is fibrosing and failing. And another problem is that in these implants, you are using a very localized area of mitomycin C. And so you have all the long-term complications of mitomycin C, such as blebitis and endophthalmitis. And furthermore, you can get implant exposure migration. So $1,000 implant, which is not equivalent to trabeculectomy, all these complications plus increased risk of needling. The last man standing, this was supposed to be the best implant up till now, PreserFlow or the InFocus micro shunt, which was supposed to replace trabeculectomy. But the first results from the 2-year randomized study showed us, if you see the IOP lowering less than 14 with the micro shunt, it's only 39% and 63% with trabeculectomy. So again, here the implant failed. The success is much higher with trabeculectomy. And for 1 minute, let us say that the Zen implant and the other implants are equal to trabeculectomy. So what are the guidelines for adopting these implants? So these are from the Canadian Medical Association. There are 5 guidelines for adopting the implants, and the last one is for rejection of the implant. So if an implant is as effective as existing technology and more costly, then you have to reject the implant. So these implants are not even equal. They are very highly costly and lower IOP as compared to trabeculectomy. So if you see the medical guidelines, definitely they should not be adopted. So in summary, MIGS, there are ethical issues because, as I showed you, there is a disparity between the quality of evidence and on effectiveness and how they are being adopted by the clinicians. There is no standardization of what technique for MIGS to use for which patient. The allocation to patients is without any objective criteria. And this is primarily being governed by surgeon training, experience, and the amount of reimbursement being given by the company to the surgeon. So if you ask what is the best IOP lowering MIGS, so this is a beautiful quote from Dr. Richard Parrish, that judging the IOP lowering effect of MIGS, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So everybody has its own favorite MIGS, but as I've shown you, the IOP lowering efficacy is very less at a very high cost. So to summarize, MIGS is only suited for very early glaucoma and ocular hypertension. Do not remove the entire trabecular meshwork. If at all, remove just 1 to 3 clock hours in the nasal quadrant. It is best to restrict to elderly patients who are undergoing cataract surgery. You must counsel the patient that high chance of failure, not achieving target IOP, and counsel for a subsequent surgery. And none of the full thickness implants are able to achieve a low target IOP that can be achieved with trabeculectomy. So the final segment, you can see this editorial that we cannot discard trabeculectomy. Trabeculectomy is the gold standard. The only issue is how to improve outcome. And if you see the long-term studies on trabeculectomy, so the problem is that a lot of studies are using very high dose of mitomycin C, like zero point 0.4 milligram per ml for 4 to 5 minutes. That is a major blunder. You can see this study over a decade. Mitomycin C was used only 0.2 milligram per ml for 2 minutes, and only 3% incidence of bleb leak and 1.5% blebitis over 9 years, and very good IOP lowering efficacy. So trabeculectomy with a low dose mitomycin C is very good. And furthermore, we have put in a small modification just recently published in Journal of Glaucoma, where you just do a limited deep spherectomy in addition to trabeculectomy. And here we have used only 0.1 milligram of mitomycin C for 1 minute. And this enhances success by routing aqueous into this intracranial lake, which prevents fibrosis. And you also get some suprachoroidal drainage. So this is a very simple modification that can be picked up by any surgeon. The basic, after doing a lamellar ciliary resection, you are creating a central crater of deep spherectomy and then proceeding with your regular trabeculectomy. So I conclude with this quote about ethics. Ethics is knowing the difference between what you have a right to do and what is right to do. Thank you very much for your kind attention.